Hey everyone, my name is Will Geary. I'm a senior data scientist at Revel.
Hey everyone, I'm Stephen Heyen. I'm a senior product manager at Revel.
And we're super excited to speak with you today about some of the work that we've been doing to electrify rideshare. So we're going to tell the story of how Revel is electrifying rideshare in New York City, with special attention to some of the key pieces of NYC open data, which make our work possible. Quick show of hands, is anyone familiar with Revel? Has anyone ridden in our rideshare program or former moped program? A few. So Revel is an electric mobility company based in Brooklyn, New York. In 2018, we launched with a fleet of electric mopeds available for rent through our mobile app. Here you can see the growth in rides taken by our moped users, starting with our pilot fleet of 68 mopeds in May of 2019, covering just a portion of Williamsburg, growing to a fleet of several thousand mopeds just 1 year later. Since launching our moped service, we served nearly 10 million rides, saving nearly 30 million pounds of CO2 emissions compared to what would have been the case if those trips were served by gas-powered cars. Here's a photo showing a sea of mopeds in one of our former warehouses about to be deployed into the world. Through launching this moped service, we learned a couple of things. First is that grid capacity is scarce. And by that I mean the capacity of the electrical grid to deliver power. Even with a fleet of mopeds having batteries that are much smaller than an electric car, we still had difficulty finding warehouse locations that were well situated on the electrical grid and able to deliver the power that we needed to charge our fleet of mopeds. The second is that acquiring and developing real estate in urban cores is expensive and difficult. EV adoption is projected to grow exponentially in the coming years, and electrifying rideshare. Consider this, the average American living in an urban area drives about 25 miles per day. New York City residents drive an average of just 9 miles per day. Compare that to an average rideshare or taxi driver who might drive 200 to 300 miles per day. What this means is electrifying a single rideshare vehicle will get you the equivalent emission savings as electrifying 20 to 30 regular privately owned passenger vehicles. So with that in mind, it's no surprise that Mayor Adams recently announced that New York will require all rideshare vehicles to be zero emission by 2030, making it the world's first major city to do so. But where will all these electric vehicles charge? The number one concern of prospective EV owners is the lack of availability of charging stations. Not only are there not enough chargers, but many of the existing chargers are non-functioning and unreliable. So over time, it became clear to us that there is a chicken or egg dilemma stalling urban EV adoption. On one hand, people who live in cities are reluctant to switch to EVs because they don't have easy access to charging. On the other hand, cities don't have enough fast charging because EV ownership is low. We know that grid real estate is scarce and expensive, and that developers want to be sure that their EV charging stations will get enough usage before making the large investments required to build them. So this is what we call the chicken or egg problem of urban EV charging. So how do we solve this problem? Our thesis is we solve the chicken or egg problem by pairing an all-electric rideshare service with a network of ultra-fast, universally compatible EV charging superhubs. Revel Rideshare provides an electric option that riders can feel good about and creates demand for our superhubs, allowing us to build them in dense urban neighborhoods. Our superhubs power our rideshare fleet, as well as personal EVs and other fleets, easing the transition to electric for both consumers and for professional drivers. So by combining electric rideshare with publicly available EV charging, we are bringing our own source of charging demand. As you can see, by making our super hubs accessible to the public, we're bringing much needed charging infrastructure to cities that need it. And as you can see, that is one happy chicken and a happy Mayor Adams as well. So all this background brings me to my main question is, how do you build an electric rideshare service from scratch? So it's easy. First, you just need some electric vehicles. Then you need to hire drivers and then go acquire users. Then you need to build charging infrastructure to power your fleet, as well as to serve public demand. And finally, profit. Just kidding, it's hard. And embedded in each of these tasks are a bunch of questions. For example, on the vehicle side, how many vehicles should you acquire? What areas should you serve? Growing a rideshare service is a balancing act. If you have too few vehicles, your users will experience long wait times, and your drivers will be overburdened. If you have too many vehicles, that means that drivers are sitting idle with their seats empty, not generating revenue. On the service area side, if you serve too small of an area, you're offering less utility to your customers, your service is less useful. But if you serve too large of an area, then again, you'll have long wait times. So what we've done is take a staggered approach. First, we launched a pilot program in August of 2021, serving just mid and lower Manhattan below 42nd Street with a fleet of 50 Tesla Model Ys. After 1 month, we expanded north to 57th Street. Then further north to 72nd Street. In November of 2021, we added service to JFK and LaGuardia airports. Continued to expand further north in Manhattan up to 96th Street. And then soon after, added service to Newark Airport. In June of 2022, we finally expanded service to parts of Brooklyn, which we continued to grow as we continued to expand our fleet. And then later expanding further into northern Manhattan, as well as parts of Queens. And then more parts of Queens. By February of 2023, we finally expanded to cover all of Manhattan. And here we are now, serving all of New York City's 5 boroughs, plus the 3 major airports, as well as parts of New Jersey, with a fleet of around 500 EVs and over 2,000 full-time professional drivers. At every step of the way, we use spatial data science, as well as New York City open data, to analyze and predict system dynamics, enabling us to make informed decisions about fleet size, service area, and the resulting outcomes like customer experience and wait times. So how do we do this? The key ingredient is data. And luckily, New York City has amazing open data. For example, the Taxi and Limousine Commission publishes historical trip records from rideshare companies, yellow taxis, and green taxis. This enabled us to develop a good understanding of the spatial distribution of rideshare demand before we launched our pilot, and informed our service area design, targeting the high demand density zones first. Here we're using a statistic called local Moran's I to identify significant clusters and outliers, that is, hotspots, cold spots, diamonds, and donuts of density of rideshare demand. So this was incredibly helpful to have a sense of the landscape of demand before launching our pilot. And here we're using a particular definition of demand density, and that's average daily number of pickups per taxi zone. So that's coming from the TLC trip record data, divided by total drivable street miles in that taxi zone. So density here is specific to street mileage. For data scientists in the crowd, just a quick shout out to 2 of my favorite Python libraries, the OSMNX library by Jeff Boeing. Makes it really easy to download street network data from OpenStreetMap, as well as PySal, the Python spatial analysis library, for doing things like creating spatial weights matrices to represent neighbors, as well as analyzing spatial autocorrelation to detect hotspots. Happy to talk about this more at the end with Q&A. So that was a little bit about understanding the spatial distribution of rideshare demand before launching. We also have more complex questions about system dynamics, such as, given a specific service area and a specific fleet size, what can we expect wait times to be? What can we expect driver utilization to be? For questions like that, we use agent-based modeling. So I'm sorry to be using a PDF, couldn't get the keynote to work, so just imagine these dots sort of moving around. So here, every dot represents an individual vehicle in a hypothetical simulated world. The blue dots are vehicles that have a passenger, gray dots are sitting idle, orange dots are rebalancing. So we use that TLC, Taxi Limousine Commission, trip record data to generate hypothetical scenarios and then study them. So given X number of fleet vehicles and Y amount of rideshare demand spatially distributed according to the TLC trip records, what kind of wait times can we expect? Are users waiting 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour? Are drivers busy 20% of the time, 50% of the time? How does that look like if we're serving, just a portion of Manhattan? What if we want to expand service to airports? What kind of impact is that going to have on the user experience? Is it going to oversaturate our drivers and pull vehicles out of the core service area? Do we need to add more vehicles? So questions like this are always coming up, and running these scenario analyses help us to get a sense of system dynamics before making service area changes. So that's some of the work that we do on the vehicles side, informing both our fleet size as well as our service area, and the Taxi and Limousine Commission trip records data is really crucial to that work. What about the other piece of the driver's side? The key questions here are how many drivers to hire, how and where to find them, how do you reach potential drivers? Once you have those drivers operating, how do you rebalance them? How do you position them ideally to serve rideshare demand? How do you match incoming trip requests to drivers? How do you best support drivers through our driver app, which Stephen will talk about? So a lot of interesting questions on this side. And again, we turn to city data. So from the Taxi and Limousine Commission's annual fact book, we know that the majority of registered taxi and rideshare drivers are foreign-born and immigrated to the US. In particular, we know that many professional drivers come from Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, the DR, China, Ghana, Egypt, and elsewhere. So with this knowledge ahead of time, we analyzed census data to identify neighborhoods containing clusters of these key immigrant populations. And we use that to inform our driver hiring outreach and communication. So where are we going to find drivers? How are we advertising and marketing to reach them? On the left, you can see actual Revel driver residential hotspot locations. And on the right is a sense of what we had thought those might look like based on the demographics of the TLC larger driver base. And as you can see, they start to look pretty similar, with hotspots including the Bronx, Harlem, Jackson Heights, and Flatbush. Another shout out to a favorite data science tool. We used the R package called Tidy Census by Kyle Walker, which makes it really easy to download census data. So another question on the driver side is how to best position drivers. The population of New York City is dynamic. It changes drastically depending on the time of day and the day of week. So imagine, again, I'm stuck with the static PDF here, so sorry for that, but imagine this sort of shifting as you go through the time of day and day of week, where the population of Manhattan swells up during the day and then decreases at night. So in order to serve this dynamic changing population, we need to constantly be repositioning our fleet of drivers to best match supply with demand. So rebalancing is the mechanism by which we move drivers from areas of low demand towards areas of higher demand to provide a better match of supply and demand, which lowers wait times for customers and increases the utilization of drivers. So here we're showing moving drivers from blue to red. And then how do we match trip requests? So incoming requests from drivers or from passengers to drivers. When we first launched, our logic was pretty simple, represented on the left here, where we simply matched a trip request with the closest available driver. Now we use batched matching. So instead of matching every request on a first in, first out basis, we group together rides that come in close proximity of each other to find possible optimization for reducing the overall wait time across the system, thus yielding a better experience for the average user.
So as you may know, some of these TLC, taxi and limousine commission drivers are often out on the road for 10 or 11 hours, really long stints of time. And one of the things we wanted to do to support our drivers on the road was build some amenities within the app. So when they're looking to take a break or rest for a minute, they're able to use New York City public data to find public restrooms or find specific for hire vehicle release spots that are designated parking spots for yellow cabs, Ubers, Lyfts, Revels, etc. to park in. So here are two screenshots for of the driver app that shows where these locations are in proximity to where the driver currently is. We also allow them to navigate directly there to really make it as simple as possible.
And both of these are New York City open data sets on public bathrooms as well as for hire vehicle rest areas. So we had a quick little demo, which we're not going to be able to share. I don't know if there's anything you want to talk over there. So this was in response to drivers coming to us and saying, I'm working long shifts, it's hard to find a bathroom. So we built into our driver app this map of bathrooms to help them locate those.
In addition to this more amenity side that supports the driver, we use TLC open data for our operations too. So the TLC license of a driver can be suspended at any time for a variety of reasons, not only like as the expiration date is coming up, but also because there's fines or tickets or accidents. And we use open data to understand if a driver's upcoming shift is going to be impacted by the validity of their TLC license. If a driver's TLC license is not valid for a time period, they're not allowed to take passengers out on the road for a variety of reasons. So in order to protect us as well as the driver for additional fines or fees that they could incur, as well as the passenger, we use open data to see real time which drivers are able to go out on the road and right before they do. We also use this same TLC validation process when we're looking to hire new drivers. So as a driver looks to engage with us for the first time, we essentially ask open data, is this TLC license valid? And it's a great process for our operations team to filter out potential applicants with qualified applicants.
So that's additional use cases of the taxi and limousine commission data for driver compliance issues. Okay, so we've talked about vehicles, fleet size, service area, and drivers. Now on to the charging infrastructure piece. So the main questions here are twofold. Where can we build charging infrastructure? By which I mean where can we build charging infrastructure? Meaning where do the physical constraints of the power grid and the political constraints like zoning allow us to build charging stations? The other question is, where should we build charging infrastructure? So given understanding of where we can build, where should we build in order to best serve charging demand? So our goal is to build charging stations in dense urban areas to primarily serve the rideshare use case as well as public charging demand. So we care a lot about where rideshare demand is located. So here's a model of rideshare demand informed both by the TLC's rideshare and taxi data as well as our own data. So we have in the bright yellow areas regions of higher rideshare demand. Since rideshare drivers are such power users of charging, locating sites in high demand areas is attractive because it's going to provide high utilization from that customer segment. We know that rideshare drivers tend to charge both where they work, so like near regions of high demand, urban cores, airports, etc. But also where they live. So rideshare drivers are likely to want to charge either at the end of a shift when they're returning home or at the beginning of a shift when they're leaving home. So we care both about where drivers are during their working shifts, where the demand is located, as well as where they live. So we care both about the demand on the rideshare side as well as driver residences. So we score potential sites according to these two dimensions, in addition to many other metrics. So we consider traffic volumes. Obviously, a site that's located near a road segment that has lots of traffic is going to have more potential demand for EV charging nearby. So we care about major roads and traffic volumes, average daily trips. That's a data piece provided by New York State. We also care about where our disadvantaged community is located, both from a perspective of building an equitable charging system, as well as securing federal grant funding towards doing so. And we care about electrical grids. Unfortunately, the New York City electrical grid is not open data. That is closed data, and it's proprietary. So we work with Con Edison to get a map of their transmission lines. I can't show that according to our contract with them. So instead, I'll just show San Francisco's electrical grid, which is publicly available, to give you an idea of what this data set looks like. So here you can see transmission lines styled by their load capacity in kilowatts. So transmission lines carry electric energy from one point to another in an electric power system. The higher the load capacity, the more power the transmission line is able to carry. And as you can see, it is not uniformly distributed. So some locations on an electric grid would be able to power a high power site like a charging station with 25 stalls, as we're building. And others would be less capable of doing that unless you were to invest in upgrading the grid yourself. Part of what's so exciting about this is the impact that we are already having on New York's electric vehicle landscape. So this graphic compares the total time, which is defined as access time plus charging time, for average EV users in New York between charge sessions. So what this means is access time is the time it would take someone to drive to the nearest charging hub, as well as wait in line for a stall to become available, plus the amount of time that actually they spend charging the vehicle. And then, so on the left is what that map looks like before the addition of just Revel's first super hub located in Bed-Stuy. We currently have 3 super hubs located across the city and are in the act of building more, but just the addition of this first one, according to Professor Joseph Chow at NYU, who generated this analysis, he found that the average EV owner in New York City would save 21 minutes per recharge trip, thanks to just that one Revel super hub. So that's every single charging trip, that's an average saving times of 21 minutes for the entire New York City landscape, the average EV owner. So that's pretty exciting. Finally, the user base. So we've talked about vehicles, drivers, charging infrastructure. How about building a user base for a rideshare system? So it helps that we did have an existing user base from our moped service. We do our best to keep wait times and prices low to provide the best possible service for our users. And it's been going really well so far. Last summer, we served our 1 millionth ride to none other than Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. So what is next for Revel? A lot of exciting stuff. We have plans to develop several more EV charging super hubs in the next year, including sites in Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, and the Bronx. You can see a map of current and future planned sites here. Some of these sites are going to be the largest EV charging sites in the Western Hemisphere, with 60-stall sites planned for Maspeth, Queens, and Hunts Point in the Bronx, and a 50-stall super hub in Harlem. So I'll just show some renderings of what's to come here. Here's a render of our planned Port Morris site in the Bronx, our Red Hook planned charging super hub, and Pier 36 in Lower Manhattan. And there's more that I can't show, including the Harlem super hub coming next year, but a lot of exciting stuff in the pipeline. So that is all that we have prepared, and I really thank everyone for your time. We're happy to answer any questions you may have and open up a discussion. Thanks.
Yeah.
How does congestion pricing affect your service or strategy? I know it's not set to go into effect until next year, but is that impacting the way that you're approaching rideshare?
Yeah, do you know how that's going to impact, right?
Yeah, my not fully understanding of the congestion pricing is that it's on a per car basis. So one of the benefits of having our own electric fleet is that we can send a car out into the field many times a day. By many, it's like 1.5 times a day. So we will incur the minimum or the maximum fee for the congestion pricing, most likely for the majority of our cars. But because of our ability to use cars multiple times a day, we have a little bit of an advantage compared to a traditional yellow cab or an Uber or a Lyft that is designated to one car and one driver.
So that means if one car serves a morning shift with driver A, and then serves an evening shift with driver B, it's only going to be fined or incur a charge for the first shift?
Yes, exactly.
For the drivers, they drive themselves or find their own way to the hubs, right?
Correct. Yep.
Did you see any preference for them to work with Revel instead of other companies simply based on this kind of ease of use?
Right. So the answer is yes. That ease of use is attractive to many drivers. So not having to purchase your own car and take a lease out on a car, for example, not having to maintain the car or clean the car or pay for charging or gas. I think in terms of the commute issue, things will become even more attractive when we open up more sites. Currently for drivers living in the Bronx, for example, it's kind of it can be a difficult commute to get to our site in Manhattan or elsewhere in Brooklyn. So that sort of depends on specifically where they live at the moment, but should get even more compelling in the future.
Yeah, there's also some inherent benefits of the driver not owning their own car, such as they have a car when they need it, so they undertake this additional commute, but they don't have to worry about alternate side parking or parking tickets and things like that. So we've seen certain drivers really love this model, and other drivers, it's not for them.
I'm just curious, did you see any difference between the sort of taxi map, hotspots, cold spots, and the population of your users and where they're at?
So it looks very similar. I don't have a comparison, but I can speak to it. I think so. Since I'll show the moped map first. Actually, since our user base, many of them are coming from our moped service, which had its own growth trajectory. Let me just pull up that map. So I think ours is probably a little bit more weighted towards where we built our initial user base in Williamsburg and Brooklyn. So probably a relative more weighting on rideshare demand slightly than what Uber, Lyft, or yellow or green cabs would see. But aside from that, it does end up looking pretty similar, which is pretty straightforward. Let me just pull that map up again. You're going to expect higher demand in higher population density areas, as well as airports.
Do you have a question as well?
Yeah, I just had, because I'm just thinking about like the other rideshare, like Turo, where it's owners hosting for riders. And so the difference I can see is that with Turo, once you get the car, you as the driver, you have to find, if I were to rent an EV, right, from someone, you would have to find an electric charging station, whereas you guys are providing, the difference is you're providing, but I could still go and charge somewhere else at a supercharger or wherever.
So yes, that we are providing charging in addition to vehicles, although there is, and the confusion is not surprising. So we're using the word rideshare. What that means in our context is ride hailing, so like an Uber or Lyft.
Oh.
We are not renting vehicles to everyday renters like Turo does. We are providing them to professional like Uber, Lyft, or taxi type of drivers.
Right.
Yeah. So we're operating. You could call it a ride hail service. We're calling it. We call it rideshare. I think for some legal reasons.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But our charging stalls are open to anyone with an EV. So if someone was to use a service like Turo, rent a Tesla, I did this just a couple weeks ago. I charged at our Bed-Stuy facility.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's sort of where I was getting at, is the charging station. So they're open to the public.
Correct.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that's another
Open 24/7 to the public, and it actually fits really nicely. So I mean, the hard part about building charging, if you aren't bringing your own demand, is that a lot of them, especially in New York, which is a little bit behind electrification compared to LA or San Francisco, the charging stalls might sit empty like 95% of the time. That's going to be really hard to build a financially sustainable business if your assets are just sitting underutilized. So what we're doing is doing the most of our internal fleet charging overnight when demand is lower. And then during the day, we see more demand from the public. It's open to the public 24/7, but we're able to get like really high utilization by combining those two pieces.
Yeah, that's great.
Kind of following up on that, have you thought about the grid management aspect, especially when you're going to open up more of these charging sites? Like either trying to flatten the load with different incentives, or like where you placed the super hubs to think about like what time of day people would want to be charging?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we have many thoughts on it. So one is that you can set the maximum power, cumulative power at a specific site. And the way that we are billed for electricity is based on peak power consumption, which for Con Edison is defined as in a month, what was the single highest 15-minute window of power demand. So it's based on the peak 15-minute chunk of time for maximum power. So we have a financial incentive to smooth charging out by lowering that peak, both with our own fleet as well as public demand. So there's a few things where we do. When we charge our own fleet overnight, part of that is because there are financial incentives to moving that demand to overnight hours away from daytime peak hours. There's also ideas like time of use pricing. We're not currently doing that, but there could be an argument for having pricing fluctuate by time of day, possibly even in a dynamic way like airlines do, that's sort of relevant to the demand at the site at that time. And then you could offer cheaper pricing towards off-peak times, and consumers like rideshare drivers that are particularly price sensitive, they may be able to have cost savings by like adjusting their charging window. So I think the EV charging pricing industry probably has a lot of like maturing to do over the coming years, where time of use and dynamic pricing becomes more common, but it's certainly on our radar. There's also a number of like incentive programs from Con Edison, various rebate programs that you can do by lowering your peaks. So
it also depends site to site. Some sites are slotted into this daytime peak, whereas others are not, depending on the size and scale of the site. So in some sites, we may need to be a little bit more intelligent about our pricing, whereas others, we can offer a flat pricing without as much of a concern.
You mentioned that like grid data is closed, right? And you have to use another city. Did you see any other like big gaps in say public or TLC or other data that's just like you couldn't find any information?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I don't blame Con Edison for making that closed because there is a security risk there. You know, if a bad actor had a highly granular view of the city's electrical grid, they could target transmission lines or transformers, which changes electricity from AC to DC. So I can't blame them for that. We did have to go through some hoops to acquire that data, but now we have a partnership with them. I have seen researchers do things like if they want to work on modeling electrical grids, to work on a synthetic version that is not exactly the same real electrical grid, but like a hypothetical version that's very similar. In terms of gaps in data, I mean, you know, operating in New York City has been fantastic because the rideshare trip data is available. You know, as we think about expanding to other cities, we do run into those issues where we have to maybe make predictions on rideshare demand if we can't get trip starts and trip ends. Aside from that, I mean, we rely on, you know, traffic counts data. The New York State GIS program does publish average daily trip counts for the whole state, which is great. That is not the case in other cities. Census data. For New York itself, I can't think of any like major gaps. So I think we're very lucky to be in a city with very rich open data. We do see that looking at expanding elsewhere, though.
To follow up on that, so you guys also operate in like New Jersey a little bit, right? Are there differences in sort of the data that New York and New Jersey provide?
Yes. So we operate our rideshare service in New Jersey. The rideshare demand over here is actually our prediction on rideshare demand. So when New York City, Uber, Lyft, and taxi drivers submit their data to the city, it's only for New York City. Once you go over to New Jersey, we don't know how many Uber pickups are happening in New Jersey at Newark Airport, for example. So we train regression models to make predictions there. We train them on New York City training data and then make predictions elsewhere. So that's how we try to get beyond that. But once you leave New York, the whole open data landscape completely changes.
Do we get that information if it's a drop-off in New Jersey but a pickup in New York? There's some drop-off at Newark data in the TLC trip records. I think it's missing a lot because it's like a really small number, and there's no pickup in New Jersey data. Yeah, but a regular drop-off not at Newark, somewhere else in New Jersey, is not going to be in that data set.
Can you say more about how you're modeling rideshare demand? Like, are there any variables we wouldn't expect, or using machine learning?
So we use machine learning as well as sometimes just simple linear regression, and the data inputs that are useful are pretty intuitive. So one of the most useful, there's so not just population density, but specifically daytime population density versus nighttime population density. There's a data set called LandScan from Oak Ridge National Lab that's really useful. LandScan, one word, from Oak Ridge National Lab. They published that for the US for free during COVID as sort of like a public service act. So that has estimates of where people are located. It's a raster image covering the whole continental US with ambient daytime versus nighttime population. That gives you a good sense of like, since population shifts during the day, it gives you a good sense of like sort of gravitational pull of, Midtown during the day, whereas maybe people are leaving Midtown at night. So that's pretty useful. Things like household income, with higher expendable income, you're going to see more rideshare demand, all else equal. Those car ownership is helpful. So in the census, you can get estimates on number of vehicles per household spatially. So in New York, in Manhattan, it's like the perfect storm for rideshare demand. We see a lot of people, especially during the day, we see higher income and we see very low car ownership. With those four things, you can do a pretty good job of predicting rideshare demand. And what we do is train models on New York and then make predictions. If we wanted to predict somewhere like San Francisco, we can get all that same data and make predictions there.
Are your models proprietary, or like, could I find a repo?
Those are proprietary, but pretty much all of the input data is public, including the training data. So someone could recreate that, but we haven't shared those yet.
I had an additional question about the siting of the super hubs. You intimated earlier there was like urban real estate prices were a consideration. How did you balance that with, you also said you were getting subsidies, like maybe federal subsidies if it's in historically disadvantaged community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we do like underwriting models so it's a financial model for any, we have a pipeline of sites that could be hypothetical charging sites, and we try to forecast the 10 to 30 year projected rate of return on that site, taking into account all of those key factors: the rent, the electricity costs, the expected demand at the site, which leads to revenue, as well as any kind of rebates or grant programs. So we have like particular minimum rate of returns that we need to be able to hit to justify building that site, and we try to predict what those will be.
Did you encounter any resistance, like was there any NIMBYism around citing these?
I don't have any kind of anecdotes like that in mind. I mean, a lot of these sites, have a history of being sort of like industrial sites, like the site we have in Bed-Stuy. We call it the Pfizer site internally because it was originally a Pfizer like chemical plant manufacturing zone. I think they generated the first penicillin. Is that right?
And that's one of the reasons we were able to use that site. They had all of this large machinery that required a lot of electricity, and without a lot of effort, we were able to just plug into the grid right there.
Yep.
There also happens to be a 300-car parking lot behind it, which is really convenient.
Yep. So we're trying to find those sort of needles in the haystack that already have that electrical capacity, and I'll just show the San Francisco one. I kind of thought, like knowing less about this problem originally, I thought it was sort of like, blue sky territory. It's like, oh, we could build anywhere, and what's the best place to do it? Really, it's like we can't build most places. What are the few number of places where it would make sense? And then of those, which ones should we start targeting first based on how much demand we think there is?
Is this something you could use ML for to predict, or is it just you did it manually, or just like these seem like good sites?
So the site, this we used ML to predict. So we're predicting utilization. So think about like what percentage of the day is a stall occupied, based on factors like what's the nearby traffic, are there shopping malls nearby, are there universities nearby, what's the EV ownership nearby. So we've put a lot of work into like ML forecasting of that. Yep.
Do you have any insight regarding the impact of weather conditions to your operational performance, at least maybe winter or summertime? Because theoretically, in hot days or hours, all your vehicles use air conditioning, and also there's a stress on the grid as well. If you have any insight.
Yeah, it's a good question. So we study weather in a number of ways. So it impacts a couple of things regarding EVs. It impacts the battery drain, so the rate at which the vehicle is consuming battery power. It's shaped, I don't have a slide for this, but it's sort of shaped like a U as a function of temperature. So at colder days, people are heating the car and consuming heat, like power, by heating the car. So every mile traveled is going to consume more battery. So that's a high point. In moderate days, you're sort of at your sweet spot in terms of battery drain. And then in warmer days, people are using AC, also consuming more power. So it sort of looks like a U. And we care about that because we're scheduling shifts. We're matching a driver to a vehicle for an 8 to 10 hour shift. And we need to know this vehicle has to have enough power to get through that shift so it doesn't die in the field and need to get towed. So we make predictions on battery drain that are specific to the weather of that day. So weather impacts battery consumption, and that's pretty well known. Like you can find that in literature of this sort of like U shape. It also impacts charging speed, so that the speed at which the battery can get power from the grid. And there, it's really cold weather days are the problem. On a colder day, due to battery chemistry that I don't fully have my head wrapped around, it's going to take longer for the battery to recharge, which is something that folks living in colder climates have reported.
Part of it is also the actual heating or cooling of the battery itself to bring it into that optimal range, either for operation, but then also for charging. So there's additional electricity used just to maintain an optimal battery temperature.
Yep. And then we all just lastly on the weather question, we do see, so on cold days, we see more charging demand from Uber, Lyft, and taxi drivers because they're going through battery more quickly. So we tend to see like an uptick in the demand we serve on colder days. Yep.
How much does external charging demand impact the sort of your planning process for your cars?
For our charging sites, you mean? I mean, it's crucial. You know, like we're bringing our own demand, but the larger sort of business opportunity.
In like day to day, like if one of your fleet can, like, is there enough demand that one of your fleet might not be able to find a charger?
Yeah, I mean, so this has really changed in the last few months. So I don't have a slide on this, but so starting as of October of 2023, there were only about 2,000 electric Uber, Lyft, and yellow taxis. So pretty small. The whole universe is like 80 to 90,000. So just like 2,000 of those were electric. Starting in November of 2023, so just a few months ago, the TLC started adding new EV-only licenses. So they had a cap on the licenses, but they would grant, they opened up an application window so that someone could get a TLC license if they had an EV. And they've doled out almost 10,000 of those. So we went from 2,000 electric, like external rideshare drivers to a little over 10,000 over the course of just a couple months. And our demand skyrocketed, you know, like from like single digit utilization from those customers to over 30, 40%. So sort of when you're reaching like 40 to 50% utilization over a whole day, that means at those peak times, you're pretty much at capacity. So now we have this problem. It's a good problem to have, but we have a problem where we do have sort of a competition during the day of our own fleet versus external fleet. And if you go by our like bedside station, you'll see that of the 25 stalls, there might only be a couple that are open. So we you know have made certain tweaks to try to optimize for that. We try to do as much charging of our own fleet overnight as possible. And we try to, there's the problem of, you know, idle time, like you don't want to be sloppy about leaving a car sitting there after it's charging. So like tightening up, you know, when a car is done, we try to move it as soon as possible. But we are getting to the point where there is some tension during the peak times. Yeah.
Maybe worth calling out too, like these additional 10,000-ish electric vehicles are really high utilization vehicles. So these TLC drivers might drive 50 or 60 hours in a week, and that might be a couple stints of 10-hour time blocks. And they probably charge either before and or after all of these. So it's not like 10,000 charge sessions a week. It's probably more like 70,000 sometimes, where it's just they need somewhere to charge, and that again is impacted by weather and other variables.
Could you guys speak on the methods you guys use to administer the feedback loops between your drivers and customers?
Yeah, so we have a very close relationship with our drivers because today they're all employees. So every single driver who comes through goes through a 4-hour training process, and they all are able to email and or call our support line at any time. We have app feedback built in throughout the app, as well as a mechanism for them to rate customers if there's an experience they liked or didn't like. And lastly, there's cameras, forward and interior facing cameras in every car to protect both the passengers and the drivers. We've seen incidents of both where passengers are behaving in a way that's not acceptable, and we've used this video feed to remove them from our service.
Going back to the land procurement thing, are you guys relying on, like, is there always like an available list or something out there, or are there sometimes like pieces of land that just like are not for sale and you have to approach somebody and like negotiate with them, or like, I don't know, do you just like drive around yourself sometimes? Drones, like what's like all the different options?
It's a very human intensive process. So, we're working with landlords, ownants, real estate brokers, that kind of thing. It's not as if there's like a clean, tidy list of like, hey, here's every great potential charging spot. Even the data you have on what is the power capacity at this site may not be accurate or up to date with what the actual picture is. So it's really like any kind of commercial real estate acquisition stage, in that you need to talk to a lot of people. You need to do site visits and do diligence in the real world. You need to bring, if you get far enough along, bring Con Edison to do like a assessment, and does this site actually have the power that you think it does on paper? So it's a lot of human labor that goes into that.
Yeah, another factor. Has anyone had a bad landlord in New York City? We also have to deal with landlords, so we might find the perfect site and everything is great. We can just drop a couple of charges in, and if the landlord wants too much money or is really difficult, it might just result in a no-go. So even if all the stars align, there's still a human element.
Can you guys speak a little bit on your funding sources? Was it all from the moped business or service that you provided, or are you guys still looking for external funding? Is there some city funding involved?
Yeah, so we're like venture capital, private equity backed. Originally raised a Series A on the moped program, and we've essentially pivoted towards electric rideshare and charging. So we raise like external private capital to do these site build outs. We get grant funding from federal government, and also rebates that help us with electricity costs from the city, but no other kind of direct dollars from the city.
And a lot of that is around the electric vehicle infrastructure.
Yeah. There's a lot
Yep.
of heavy investment in that now.
Yep. Yeah. So there's something called Make Ready funding, where they will essentially try to help you build out that site, and you're on the hook for paying for the electricity, but they may contribute significantly to the actual infrastructure build out.
Sort of related to that, to what extent do you work with local city agencies like city planning, DDC, et cetera, when you're building?
It's a good question. I mean, I'm sort of less on the actual like architectural build out side. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I'm sure we do. Neither of us would be the.
I'm sure we do. Yeah. I mean, I know we work with Con Edison on the electricity side. Certainly, we work with the Taxi Limousine Commission and DOT on the rideshare side. I don't have any anecdotes about the EDC or the planning department, but I'm sure that there's some relationship there.
Can you speak any more about the motivation to pivot and sort of any of the evaluation and data that went into that?
Yeah, so it's kind of back to the original learnings here. These two learnings came out of our experience building the moped service. To find, the batteries in these are much smaller than a car, but to actually find a site that had enough power capacity to be able to charge them was much harder than any of us thought it would be. So that was sort of a light bulb, was like, wow, there's a real opportunity in charging, whether it's for mopeds or for electric vehicles. We shut down the moped business several months ago, which was really sad for all of us. I was an avid user, also had a free discount, which so super bums to lose that. So I think some of the lessons there are, it's really hard to run a business in a sustainable way when your assets are out in the elements all day, depreciating from weather, wear and tear, theft and vandalism. It's very hard to keep that business afloat financially when your main asset is just depreciating so heavily. So I think that was one of the motivators towards like a pivot away from that towards this other area of urban electric mobility.
Yeah, another is definitely scale. We really created the electric moped industry in New York, but as you saw by a lot of the data we were showing, the TLC, the taxi business is just much larger. That paired with a lot of market signals showing that there will be, by 2030, all for-hire vehicles will be electric. We were kind of in the right place at the right time in some regard is to get an early start on that. So yeah, the other element is just the scale of the business opportunity.
Yep.
You should take over the gas station sites.
Yeah. if they're well located on the grid, then totally. I did see that. I think Shell is closing down some and building up new ones. But yeah, it's that grid piece that you may have a perfect gas station site. It'd be great to make it electric, but if that power isn't there, then you need to bring it yourself, which is a huge investment. Great, cool. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for your time.